Welcome back. If you are here, you witnessed the beginning. You watched a woman walk through fire. The fire of rejection, of exile, of carrying a secret across a frozen wilderness, and find on the other side something she had not dared to want. A home. A bond. A king who chose her with the full, deliberate weight of 3 centuries of will. You watched a child be born with the moon in his eyes. Now the ancient things are waking. This is a story about what it costs to be chosen by fate, not the romantic cost, not the sweet ache of a bond finding its true shape, but the real cost. The cost that shows up years after the ceremony, in the dark, in the cold, when the enemy returns, and the enemy this time is not a scorned alpha with a small army and a wounded pride. The enemy this time is something that has been asleep for 4,000 years and is not pleased about it. This is a story about a woman who has already survived the worst thing she could imagine, and discovers that the imagination, in times of peace, grows lazy. This is Book 2. Close your eyes. Let the world fall away. We are not done yet. The Dreamer and the Dark. The Lycan Palace. 5 years and 3 months after the bonding. The first sign was the cold. Not the seasonal cold, not the legitimate, well-mannered cold of a mountain winter that arrived on schedule and departed in spring with reasonable predictability. This was something different. This was a cold that came from the inside of things, a cold that found its way into the palace through walls 3 feet thick and fires burning 24 hours, and the combined body heat of 200 wolf shifters, who ran warmer than humans by a significant metabolic margin. It came first in the deepest hours of the night, in the week after the solstice, while Calix slept his strange silver-lit sleep, and Maddox lay awake beside Shyla and listened to the palace breathe around him the way he had listened to it for 300 years, knowing every timber, every stone, the particular creak of the East Wing corridor at this temperature and this wind speed. Something was wrong with the listening. The sounds were all correct, precisely correct. Guard rotation on the hour, fire settling in the great hearths, the distant howl of a sentry wolf on the north perimeter. But underneath the sounds, in the frequency that wolf senses tracked below conscious thought, there was something new. A subtone, a vibration in the earth itself that had not been there a week ago. He did not tell Shyla that night. He was still at 5 years into what he privately considered the single most disorienting and essential experience of his life, learning the difference between things that should be shared immediately and things that needed to be understood before they were shared. He had spent 3 centuries alone, making every decision in isolation, carrying every concern behind the iron architecture of his own skull. Partnership required a recalibration he found both deeply uncomfortable and, he had come to admit, deeply necessary. He thought about the seer's words. The old things are waking. They've been asleep because someone made them sleep, and whatever made them sleep is gone now. He thought about his son sleeping down the corridor, wrapped in the silver light that had not fully left him since the night of the solstice, the light that simply lived in the boy now, present but banked, the way fire was present in coals without being visible. He lay in the dark, and he thought, whatever is coming, we are not ready. And then, because he had also learned, at some personal cost, and across 5 years of incremental and occasionally painful self-revision, that this kind of thought was better shared than carried alone, he turned toward Shyla. She was already awake, looking at the ceiling. Her hand found his in the dark. "You feel it too," he said. "I felt it for 3 days," she said. "I was waiting for you to say something first." A pause. "Why?" "Because," she said, might with the particular dry patience that 5 years of living with a 300-year-old man had refined to a precision instrument, "you always know more than you're telling me, and I find it more efficient to wait until you're ready to tell it rather than spend energy asking." Another pause. That is extremely perceptive, he said. I know. She squeezed his hand. Tell me, he told her. The elder healer confirmed it 2 days later, in his customary style, which was to say, without any of the social cushioning that might have made the information more comfortable to receive. The boundary wards are degrading, he said. He had spread a series of ancient charts across the war room table, the kind of charts that did not depict geography, but rather the invisible architecture of power that underlay geography. The ley lines and blood marks and bone-anchored agreements that had defined the Lycan territory for 1,000 years. Not quickly. Perhaps imperceptibly to anyone without the sensitivity, but degrading. Since when? Maddox asked. Since the night of the solstice, the healer said. Since the boy manifested. The room went quiet. You're saying his awakening triggered this? Shyla said. I am saying they are correlated. The healer looked at her with his still water eyes. Whether the manifestation caused the degradation, or whether both were caused by the same underlying shift in what the old texts call the Great Balance, that I cannot say with certainty. What can you say with certainty? Maddox asked. A long pause. That whatever has been contained by the Great Balance for 4,000 years, the elder said quietly, is beginning to test the walls of its containment, and that the walls were not built to last forever. They were built to last until a champion arose who could address the source rather than merely the symptom. He looked at the door in the direction of the east wing, in the direction of a 5-year-old boy who had made friends with the palace seer and dreamed of conversations with the moon. He is 5 years old, Shyla said. Her voice was steady. Her hands beneath the table were not. Yes, the healer said. Which means we have time. How much time? The elder wolf looked at the degrading wards on his ancient charts. He said nothing for a long moment. Enough, he said, if we use it well. The Council of Old Blood. The Black Hall. 1 week later, Maddox called a council. This was, in itself, a significant event. In 300 years of rule, he had called 8 formal councils. 3 of them had been to declare war. 2 had been to end it. One had been to adjudicate a territorial dispute that had threatened to collapse the fragile peace between 7 border pacts. 1 had been to formally recognize a new alpha lineage after the previous line died out in an epidemic that Maddox had quietly suspected was not natural. And 1 had been, he had not thought about this council in decades. Ma had buried it beneath the accumulated weight of subsequent centuries, to hear a seer speak the prophecy of the moon's champion for the first and only time in recorded history. That council had been 4,012 years ago. He had not been present. He had not been born. But the records existed, inscribed in the blood ink on darkwood pages that Shyla had read in his library on the night he first understood he was lost. The records that predated him. It predated the Lycan Kings as a lineage, predated almost everything that now existed in the world above ground. He had those records on the table when the council members arrived. They came from across the territory, 7 elder wolves, chosen not for political loyalty but for age and knowledge, the kind of knowledge that lived in the bones of creatures who had been alive long enough to remember things that had passed from history into myth. The youngest was 112. The oldest, a wolf named Varian, who had been old when Maddox was young, claimed he could not remember his exact age, which Maddox suspected was not entirely truthful. Shyla sat at his right hand. She had done this since the first year of their bonding, gradually and without announcement, occupying the space beside him with the particular quiet authority of someone who had decided they belonged somewhere and was not seeking anyone's permission to confirm it. The council had accepted this with varying degrees of grace. Varian had accepted it immediately, with the air of someone finally seeing a thing slot into its correct position. 2 others had required a year and a personal conversation each. The remaining 4 had adapted without comment. She sat there now, a pen in her hand, a sheaf of clean parchment before her. she had, in 5 years, is become the institutional memory of every council that took place in the Black Hall, not because anyone had asked her to, but because she had understood within the first month that 300 years of rule had generated an enormous amount of undocumented institutional knowledge that existed only in Maddox's head and would be catastrophically lost if anything happened to him. He had found her doing this on a night 6 months after the bonding, sitting at a table surrounded by old records and a stack of fresh parchment, systematically reconstructing the decision logic behind 40 years of territorial agreements. He had stood in the doorway and watched her work for a full minute before she noticed him. "Someone should write this down," she had said, without looking up. "I know," he had said. Someone should have written it down 300 years ago." "I know that too." She had looked at him then, with the expression she reserved for the moments when she was genuinely uncertain whether to be fond or exasperated. "Go to sleep," she had said. "I'll be done by morning." He had loved her so much in that moment that it was a physical thing, a pressure in his chest that he still had no adequate language for. He went to sleep. She was done by morning. The council heard the healer's report on the boundary degradation. They heard Maddox's account of what the seer had said at Calix's birth. Then Maddox opened the ancient records to the page he had marked, the transcription of the prophecy of the moon's champion in the original script and in translation, and read it aloud. The silence that followed was long and varied. Some silences are empty. This one was full. "The blood of 2 lines joined," Varian said finally. His voice was ancient and slow, like a river moving over stones it had smoothed over centuries. "The champion born at the convergence of Lycan and Alpha heritage, carrying the mark of neither wholly but the authority of both." He looked at Maddox. "You knew when you took the bond with her." "I knew the seer's words," Maddox said. "I did not know what they would produce. And yet you chose." A pause. "I chose her," Maddox said. "Whatever came from that was a consequence I accepted." Shyla, beside him, did not look up from her parchment, but her pen stopped moving for exactly 2 seconds, and then resumed. Varian nodded slowly. "The prophecy says the champion will not be ready until the 7th year," he said. "We have, if the boy's timeline follows the prophecy, just under 2 years. 2 years before what?" one of the younger elders asked. Varian looked at him with the patient absence of expression that only the very old could achieve. "Not before he must stand before whatever is breaking through the boundary," he said. "Before he must do what champions do." Another silence. "He is 5 years old," the younger elder said. "He was 5 when the moon spoke to him," Varian said. "He will be 7 when the walls fall, and between those 2 facts lies everything we must do." He turned to Shyla then, not to Maddox, to her. It struck her as deliberate. "You carried him," he said. "You brought him through the wilderness and delivered him to this door. Whatever he becomes, the first foundation of it is what you built." She met the ancient wolf's eyes. "Then I'd better keep building," she said. What rises in the dark? The northern borderlands. 6 weeks later. The first attack came without warning, which was itself a kind of warning. A border pack, small, quiet, might the kind of pack that existed in the gaps between larger territories and kept itself small and quiet by design, sent a runner to the Black Cliff Palace in the depths of a night so cold the runner's breath froze before it left his mouth. He collapsed at the outer gate and said, before he lost consciousness entirely, 4 words. The ground opened up. Maddox took 30 soldiers and his wolf and went north before dawn. Shyla did not ask to come. She understood, or had come to understand. And over 5 years of being bonded to a man whose first instinct in any crisis was to place himself between the threat and everything he valued, that there were moments when asking was not the right move. She understood also that he needed her here, with Calyx, in the palace that held everything that mattered, maintaining the center while he went to the edge. She watched him leave from the upper battlements. His wolf form disappeared into the dark tree line, a streak of midnight against snow. Oh, and she stayed at the railing until the forest had swallowed him entirely. Then she went back inside and did what she had learned. In the years since she walked out of Silver Crest with 3 copper coins and a wolf-carved pendant, was the only response she had ever found adequate to fear. She got to work. The Northern Border Pack's territory, what remained of it, told a story that Maddox read the way he read all landscapes, as evidence. Wise as the aftermath of choices made by forces he needed to understand before he could oppose them. The ground had, in fact, opened up. Not metaphorically. 3 fissures, each running a quarter mile through the forest floor, had split the earth along lines that corresponded, when Maddox cross-referenced them against the old wards charts the healer had given him, precisely to the boundary marks laid down by the original territorial agreements. As though something beneath the earth had found the ancient lines and split along them. As though the boundary itself was the wound. The Pack's people were alive. Frightened, displaced, their territory shattered into useless fragments, but alive. Whatever had come through the fissures had not been interested in the small wolves of a minor border pack. It had been interested in the fissures themselves, in the boundary, in the opening. And Maddox stood at the edge of the largest fissure and looked down into it. It was deep, deeper than natural geology should have permitted in this terrain, deeper than the light from his raised torch could reach. And from it came the subtone he had first heard in the palace walls on the night after the solstice. Louder now and more defined, the vibration of something enormous and old that was pressing, very deliberately, against the underside of the world. His wolf went very still. This was not a threat it could fight with teeth and mass. This was not something that could be driven off or killed or sent back to its own territory with a message. This was something else entirely. He thought about his son. He turned to his captain, a wolf who had been with him for 60 years, who had the particular quality of loyalty that goes so deep it becomes architectural, and said quietly, "Send word to the elders. The degradation is not gradual. It is deliberate. Sir, and tell the healer—" He paused. "Tell him the 7th year may not wait for the timeline." The runner arrived back at the palace before dawn. Shyla read the message. She read it twice, the way she had learned to read everything of consequence. Once for what it said, once for what it implied. She folded the message and placed it in the locked box she kept beneath the writing desk. Then she went to Calyx's room. He was awake. He was often awake in the pre-dawn hours now, another thing that had changed since the solstice, as though some internal clock had been reset by the manifestation. He was sitting up in his bed with his small, solemn face turned toward the window and the dark sky beyond it. His eyes, in the dark, were edged with the faintest silver. She sat on the edge of his bed. He leaned against her without being invited, the way he had since he was small enough to fit in the crook of one arm. "Something happened," he said. "Not a question." "Something happened at the northern border," she said. "Your father is there, he's fine." A pause. The ground opened up. He was quiet for a moment. "The moon told me that would happen," he said. "Not that exactly. She said there are doors beneath the world, old ones, and they're not locked from our side." "Who locked them from their side?" He frowned, the way he did when he was assembling information that he had been given in fragments, fitting pieces together with the patient concentration of a child who had learned that some things didn't make sense immediately and required time. "Someone who doesn't exist anymore," he said finally. She said, "The moon said. They locked the doors, and then they were gone, and now nobody is holding the locks." Shyla held her son and looked at the dark window and thought about 4,000 years of locked doors and the cost of what it meant to hold a lock that had no key. "Are you scared?" she asked him. He considered this with the earnest honesty he brought to everything. "Not yet," he said. "She says I shouldn't be scared yet. She says I'm not ready to be scared yet, and being scared before you're ready just uses up energy." Despite everything, Shyla almost smiled. "The moon is very practical," she said. "She has to be," Calix said. "She's been watching a very long time." Raymond's Gambit. Silvercrest territory. Simultaneously, Raymond had spent 5 years building something. He had not, in those 5 years, rebuilt his pride. Pride of that particular variety did not rebuild so much as it reconstituted itself into new and more complicated shapes. What he had built was information, a network of runners and informants and minor pack alliances, yet assembled with the patient industry of a man who had learned too late, too expensively, that raw force had a ceiling. He knew about the fissures before the Northern Pack's runner reached the Black Cliff Palace. He knew about Calix's manifestation. He had, in fact, known about it within 48 hours of the solstice, when the white light had been visible from 3 mountain ranges away, and every wolf within 100 miles had felt the vibration in their bones. He had stood at his window, as Shyla had seen him, had witnessed him in his study's dark reflection, and watched the sky, and smiled his cold, careful smile. He had not missed the child. He wanted to be precise about this, even in the privacy of his own assessment. He had never, in the 6 years of his relationship with Shyla, particularly wanted children. He had wanted heirs, which was a different thing entirely, a political category rather than an emotional one. What he had missed, what had sustained the particular slow burn of his resentment across 5 years, was the loss of something he had not valued until it was gone. He had not valued Shyla. He understood this now. He had had her and not valued her. And then he had thrown her away, and she had become, somehow, without any of the resources or advantages that should have made such a thing possible, the queen of the most powerful territory on the continent. This was an offense to the natural order. He did not intend to allow it to stand. The man across the table from him in the Silvercrest war room was not a wolf. This was, in itself, unusual enough to note. In Raymond's world, in the world of pack politics and alpha hierarchies and the elaborate social architecture of wolf-shifter society, non-wolves existed at the margins. Humans who knew about their world were rare and generally treated with the condescension afforded to lesser beings. Other supernatural entities existed, certainly, in the old stories, in the territories that had been lost or abandoned in the centuries since the packs consolidated their power. The man across the table was something else, something that wore the shape of a man with the particular careful precision of a creature that had learned the shape by observation rather than by being born into it. His eyes were wrong, not wrong in any way that would register immediately, not obviously inhuman, but wrong in the way that mathematical errors were wrong, technically undetectable until you did the calculation, and then undeniable. He had given his name as Corveth. Raymond suspected this was not his name exactly, but rather a name he had selected from some catalogue of human names as being adequately unremarkable. "The boundary degradation proceeds as expected," Corveth said. His voice was pleasant. It was always pleasant, in the way that very cold places were pleasant in descriptions. "Before you went there, the champion child has manifested. The king has gone north to assess the damage. The palace is reduced." "My son is in that palace," Raymond said. A pause so brief it might have been imagined. "Your biological heir," Corveth agreed. "Yes." "I want him alive," Raymond said. "Whatever arrangement we have, that's the condition. He comes back to Silvercrest." Corveth smiled. It was a structurally correct smile, positioned appropriately on his face, but it did not engage anything above the cheekbones. "The boy is the champion," he said. "Whatever he has been called to do, it must be done. or the things behind the doors will not stop at the boundary. They will not stop at Silver Crest. They will not stop at anything." "Then he does what he was born to do," Raymond said, "and then he comes home." Another pause. "Of course," Corveth said. He smiled again. The smile said many things. None of them were yes. But the weight of knowing. The Black Cliff Palace. Maddox returns. He came back different. This was something she felt before she saw him. The particular alteration in the thread between them. The bond that had settled into her like a second heartbeat, that she tracked with the same unconscious precision with which she tracked her own pulse. Something had changed at the northern border. Not in what he knew exactly, though he had learned things. Something had changed in how he was holding what he knew. He came through the palace gate in his wolf form and shifted before the courtyard, and she was there. She was always there when he returned from anything. It was one of those habits that had formed without decision, simply the weight of love finding its expression. And when he looked at her, his eyes were the way they got when he was carrying something heavy and had decided to carry it alone. She had spent 5 years learning the difference between things she should let him carry alone and things she should refuse to let him. "No," she said. He stopped. "Whatever you're about to not tell me," she said. "No." A long pause. He looked at the courtyard around them. The guards, the servants, the perpetual organized motion of a palace that did not stop because the king was having a moment. "Inside," he said. Whilst they sat in the small study off the war room, a room that had no political significance, that existed for thinking rather than governing, that held 2 chairs and a reading lamp and a shelf of books that were there because he liked them rather than because they were useful. She had found this room in the first month and had immediately understood that it was the closest thing he had to a private self, and she had been careful with it. He sat. She sat across from him. Between them was the lamp, and the silence and the particular quality of the space between 2 people who have learned each other well enough to let the silence do some of the work. He told her everything. It took 30 minutes, and he told it in his way, methodical, sequential, with the particular careful precision of a man who had learned that imprecision in communication created problems he then had to spend resources solving. He told her about the Fishers, about their correspondence to the old ward lines, about the subtone in the earth and what it implied about the nature of what was pressing upward. Then he told her what he had not written in the message. "There was something at the edge of the largest fissure," he said. "Not quite visible, present in the way that very large things are present before you see them. The air changes, the light changes. The wolf sense registers the mass of something before the eyes can locate it." "What did it feel like?" she asked. A pause. "Old," he said. "Not evil, or not only evil. Old in the way that the earth is old, in the way that the bones of the world are old. Something that predates good and evil as categories. Something that simply is." She absorbed this. "And it was at the boundary," she said. "It was testing the boundary," he said. "It was feeling for the weakness, learning the shape of the degradation." Silence. "It knows about Calyx," she said. The air in the room changed. "I believe so," he said quietly. She had expected this. Yet knowing it in the abstract was different from hearing it confirmed. She sat with it for a moment, the way she had learned to sit with difficult things, not turning away, not rushing toward, just being present with the weight of it until the weight became familiar. 2 years, she said. "Possibly less," he said. "The degradation is accelerating." She nodded. She looked at her hands. Then she looked at him. "Then we need to talk about what happens next," she said. "Not what the council thinks should happen, not what the prophecy says, what we actually do, you and I and Calyx, to prepare him for whatever this is." He met her eyes. "You have thoughts," he said. "I have a plan," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The thing that preceded a smile, that came from the part of him that had not had occasion to smile for 300 years, and was still, 5 years on, faintly surprised when it happened. "Of course you do," he said. "The education of a champion. The Black Cliff Palace." The following month, Shyla's plan was, characteristically, comprehensive. She had been constructing it, she told Maddox, since the night Calix first dreamed of the moon, 3 years ago. She had not told him this at the time because she had not known if the plan was necessary. She had built it the way she built everything, quietly, thoroughly, in the spaces between other things in case it was needed. It was needed.
The plan had 4 parts. The first part was knowledge. Calix would learn the history. All of it, not the edited version in the palace records, not the diplomatic account of how the Lycan Kingdom had come to be and what it had replaced, but the full account, the pre-pack world, the first wars, the great balance that had been established by the moon goddess at the conclusion of the first war, the champion who had maintained that balance for 4,000 years before dying.
The 4,000 years of gradual deterioration that had followed. The elder healer provided the texts. The seer provided the context. Varian provided, in his slow Stone River way, the testimony of a witness. He had been born 800 years after the last champion's death. But his own teachers had been born earlier, and their teachers earlier still. And the thread of direct witness stretched back, fraying but continuous, to within living memory of events that were now myth. And Calix absorbed all of it. This was the thing about him that continued to astonish everyone who worked with him. Not the silver light, not the moon dreams, not the wolf form that burned like a star. It was his capacity for attention. He listened with his whole body, eyes steady, and when he asked questions, they were the questions of someone who was genuinely trying to understand rather than demonstrate that they were listening. He had this from Shyla, Maddox thought. Watching his son in the library with a stack of books 3 times his height. Entirely from her. The second part was physical training. Not the standard pack training of young wolves, the hierarchy drills and dominance exercises and submission protocols that Shyla had quietly, consistently, and with considerable diplomatic precision begun to reform in the palace since her arrival. Something different. Something that worked with what Calix was, rather than imposing a shape he didn't fit. Maddox ran this part himself. He had not, he told her on the night she proposed it, with the particular careful honesty that was his version of vulnerability. He had not known how to train a son. He had trained soldiers. He had trained captains and generals and werewolves and scouts. He had never before stood across from a small person who looked back at him with a combination of his own eyes and Shyla's curiosity and felt anything other than the comfortable certainty of a superior instructing an inferior. "He looks at me," Maddox said, "and I become uncertain." "Good," Shyla said. "That is not what fathers are supposed to feel." "I think," she said, "that it might be exactly what fathers are supposed to feel. And most of them just don't admit it." He ran the training anyway. He ran it every morning, in the inner courtyard where the stone was smoothed by generations of training feet, and he ran it with the same care he brought to the most important strategies of his 300-year career. The acknowledgement that this situation was new, that his existing expertise only partially applied, and that the outcome mattered more than his comfort. Calix learned fast. He learned with a quality that went beyond aptitude, a quality of recognition, as though the things Maddox taught him were not new information, but confirmation of things he already held somewhere below conscious awareness. He shifted cleanly and fully before the end of the first month of training, the enormous silver wolf form emerging with the same sudden completeness it had shown on the solstice night, settling into the courtyard like a thing of light, discovering that stone could bear its weight. Maddox stood in the silver radiance of his son's wolf form one morning and felt, for the second time in his life, the particular species of fear that had nothing to do with threat and everything to do with the overwhelming, inarticulate recognition of something too large to contain in ordinary language. The first time had been the night Shyla arrived at his gate. The third part was the hardest. Shyla called it the work of the heart. Maddox privately thought this was a willfully imprecise description for something that was, in practice, ferociously difficult to implement. What she meant was, they needed to ensure that Calix understood with the same completeness that he understood history and tactics and the mechanics of his power, what he was fighting for. Not the abstract, not the prophetic, the concrete, daily, irreplaceable specific of it. She did this by, in the simplest terms, living. She continued the East Wing garden, which by the second year of Calix's life had expanded into a proper garden, and by the fifth had become something the palace staff maintained with genuine pride. She continued her habit of sitting in the kitchens with the head cook, and the habit of knowing the names of every wolf in the palace, and the habit of being present, visibly and without ceremony, in the daily life of the place that was her home. She brought Calix with her. She brought him to the kitchens and to the garden and to the healer's workroom and to the library and to the border councils, and on the 2 occasions when it was appropriate, to the small ceremonies that marked the births and bonds and deaths of the palace community. She let him see that what they were protecting was not a throne or a bloodline or an abstraction. It was this cook who laughed and whose laughter had been a revelation to Maddox in his 3rd century. It was this guard, who had been 16 when Shyla helped him with a sprained wrist and was now 21 and the fastest runner in the North Perimeter Patrol. It was the garden in the East Wing that had been dead until she tended it and was now alive. She was teaching him, in the only way she knew how to teach anything, by showing him what it looked like. The 4th part was simplest and most complex. She talked to him. Every night before sleep, she sat on the edge of his bed and they talked. Or about what he had learned that day, about what confused him, about what the moon had said the night before, and what he thought it meant. About his father, who was trying to teach him to fight in the way that people who have survived by fighting try to pass on what they know, by pressing something very important through an imperfect medium. About the ancient things behind the doors, which he talked about with the matter-of-fact clarity of someone who had been given more information about them than his parents knew, because the moon was apparently a more forthcoming tutor than any of the palace elders. About fear, about what it was and what it wasn't, and when it was useful and when it was a story you told yourself that prevented action. About love, what it looked like in practice, why it was worth defending. On one of these nights, when he was 6.5 and the boundary degradation had become visible to the naked eye at the North Perimeter, a shimmer in the air like heat haze, except it was midwinter and the heat had nothing to do with it, Calix looked at her with his silver-edged gold eyes and said, "Are you scared, Mama?" She thought about it, the way she thought about all his questions, with genuine attention, without the reflexive reassurance that she knew would not serve him. "Yes," she said. He nodded slowly. "The moon says that's okay," he said. "She says scared means it matters. And she says—" He paused, assembling the words with his characteristic care. "She says that the people who were in charge last time weren't scared enough. They thought they could lock the doors and walk away and that would be enough forever." A silence. "And it wasn't enough," Shyla said. "No," Calix said. "So this time someone has to stay." She looked at her son. When her son with the moon in his eyes and the silver fire in his wolf form and the ancient weight of a 4,000-year-old prophecy settled around his 6-year-old shoulders. She took his face in her hands. "Not alone," she said. "Whatever you stay for, we stay with you." His eyes filled. He blinked it back with the dignity of a child who had decided somewhere along the way that dignity mattered, but he leaned into her hands, and she held him. And outside the palace walls, the boundary shimmered and strained. They had less than a year. The enemy returns. The Black Cliff Palace. Spring, Calix's 7th year. The message arrived with spring. It was written on silver crest parchment, the distinctive heavy stock stamped with the old sigil, the kind of parchment that announced its own importance. But the words inside it were wrong. The words inside it did not sound like Raymond, who communicated with the ponderous formality of a man who used official language as armor. These words were clean, stripped of ceremony. They said, "The boy is in danger that goes beyond the boundary. I have information you do not. I will come to the outer gate alone. If you choose not to receive me, what happens next is not my responsibility." It was unsigned. It did not need to be. Maddox's first response, which he expressed to the empty war room before composing himself, was not fit for inclusion in the palace records. His second response was to bring it to Shyla. She read it twice. Then she set it on the table and looked at it for a moment without touching it, the way she looked at things she was assessing for deception. "He's scared," she said. Maddox looked at her. "I know him," she said. 6 years, I know him. This," she tapped the parchment. "This is not Raymond performing strength through formal language. This is Raymond removing all the performance because something has frightened him past the point where the performance is available." A pause. "That could be manufactured," Maddox said. "A tactic." "It could be," she agreed. "But if it is, it's a better tactic than Raymond has ever used, and whatever has changed in him in 5 years, I don't think his fundamental strategic intelligence has made that kind of leap." He was quiet. "You want to receive him," he said. I want to hear what he knows," she said. "What he does with the information after. That's between him and his choices. But if he has information we don't have, and we let pride refuse it, and something happens because of that—" She left it unfinished. She didn't need to finish it. "If he comes within range of Calix," Maddox said very quietly. "He won't," she said. "I'll make sure of it." Raymond came alone, as promised. He was thinner than she remembered. The gold of his hair had threads of silver now, not from age exactly. Alphas aged slowly, from something else. Something that happened to faces when they were carrying something they couldn't put down and didn't know how to ask for help with. She met him at the outer gate herself, without Maddox. This had been the second part of the negotiation and had taken the most time. Convincing Maddox that her meeting Raymond alone at the gate was tactically sound rather than an emotional decision. Well, it was both. She had not tried to claim otherwise. Raymond looked at her across the 10 feet of cleared ground between the gate and the tree line. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking, and she looked back, and she felt precisely what she had expected to feel, nothing complicated, a kind of sad clarity, the way you felt about a wound that had fully healed, present in the memory but not in the body anymore. "You look well," he said. "You look like you haven't slept," she said. Oh, a pause. He almost smiled, a shadow of it, the ghost of an expression that would have been very different if made by someone who had different choices behind them. "There's a man," he said. "He calls himself Corveth. He came to Silver Crest 6 months ago, and he—" Raymond stopped. "He offered me an alliance, information, resources, a path to—" Another stop. "He said he could help me reclaim what I'd lost. And you agreed." A long pause. "I listened," Raymond said. "I wanted to agree. Well, I listened for a long time, and I asked questions, and I watched, and eventually I understood what he actually was." "What is he?" Raymond looked at her with the eyes of a man who had been afraid for several months and had decided the fear was not going to stop being relevant. "He is one of them," he said. "The old things, one of the first ones. He has been above ground walking around in a shape that isn't his real one for longer than I can trace. And what he wants—" He stopped. "Why, what he wants is not my alliance. What he wants is a path to the champion, a path that bypasses the Lycan King. The air between them went very still. He wants Calix, Shyla said. He wants to prevent the champion from fulfilling the prophecy, Raymond said. Because if the champion succeeds, if the balance is restored, the old things go back behind the doors, back into containment. They don't want to go back. Silence. So he has been using you, she said. Raymond's jaw worked. Yes, he said. She looked at him. At the man who had rejected her, who had sent soldiers to reclaim a child he had never intended to love, who had spent 5 years in the amber of his own resentment. At the man who had, in the end, come to a gate he had been driven away from in humiliation, alone, to give her information that cost him something. She thought about what Maddox had said once, that the strongest thing he had ever seen was not a wolf in its lichen form, but a person choosing something difficult when the easy choice was available. "Where is Corveth now?" she asked. "Silver Crest," Raymond said. "He doesn't know I'm here. He thinks I'm hunting. I have—" He reached into his coat, withdrew a leather case, small and sealed. Letters, his communications with the others, with the ones still behind the doors, what they're planning, what the timeline is. He held it out. She took it. Their hands did not touch. The case passed between them through the cold spring air, carrying the weight of 5 years of damage and whatever complicated thing was happening in this moment that would not be simply categorized. "Why?" she asked. He looked at her. Something moved across his face, something she recognized, not from their years together, but from a mirror. The particular expression of someone seeing themselves clearly after a long time of not looking. "He talked about the boy," Raymond said, "about what would happen to the boy if the prophecy failed, and He stopped. "He is my blood, whatever I am. He is my blood, and you, whatever you are to me now, you would never have had him if not for me. And that means what happens to him is—" He stopped again. "I cannot make right what I did. I know that. But I can choose not to let the thing that is using me do worse." Silence. She looked at him for a long time. "Go home," she said. "Keep Corveth thinking you're still his. When we need you, and we will need you, I'll send word." Raymond blinked. "You're using me." "Turnabout," she said, without cruelty, without satisfaction, "is an old practice." He looked at her for another moment. Then he nodded, once, and walked back into the trees. She watched him until the spring forest swallowed him. Then she turned back toward the palace, the leather case warm in her hands, and walked fast. She had planning to do. The night the doors opened, the Black Cliff Palace and the northern border, Calix's 7th year midsummer. The doors opened at midsummer, 3 weeks earlier than the council's most pessimistic projection. Maddox had spent those 3 weeks preparing for a door opening in autumn. He had positioned wolves at 3 perimeter points, established communication relays. I'd arranged for the elders and the seer and Calix to be in the safest interior chamber of the palace with 3 layers of guard between them and any approach. The doors did not open at the perimeter. They opened in the palace courtyard. Shyla heard it first. She was in the war room, reviewing the letters from the leather case. She had spent 3 weeks translating their implications with the elder healer, all building a strategic picture of what Corveth and his associates intended, when the subtone she had learned to track like a weather pattern became something different. Not a vibration beneath the world, a vibration in the world, direct and immediate, and she was out of the war room door before she had consciously decided to move. The courtyard was full of light she had no frame of reference for. Not the silver of Calix's manifested form, that light was warm and specific, was the light of something chosen. This was the light of things that had been underground for 4,000 years and found the surface after long darkness, white and absolute and without any of the qualities that made light pleasant. It illuminated everything and forgave nothing. In the center of the courtyard, Corveth had stopped wearing the shape of a man. She did not look at him directly. That was instinct. The same deep animal instinct that understood not to look at certain kinds of power directly. She looked at the space around him, at the place where the stone of the courtyard had split along lines that corresponded perfectly to the fissures in the north, at the 3 figures that had come through the opening with him and now stood at intervals like witnesses to something that had been planned. The palace guards were on the ground. Not dead. She had a terrible 3 seconds of certainty that they were dead before the nearest one moved, and she understood that they had been simply removed from the situation, the way a very large hand might remove small obstacles from a path it had decided to take. She was alone in the courtyard. And then she was not alone. A Maddox came from the north gate at a pace that covered the distance from the gate to the courtyard in the time that should have been physically impossible even for a Lycan. He shifted in mid-stride, the half-second transformation, and arrived in his wolf form, the midnight form that displaced the air, and what happened in the next 30 seconds was the most violent thing she had ever witnessed, and also, despite everything, the most clarifying. He was not strong enough. She understood this in the time it took to draw one breath. He was 300 years old and the most powerful creature she had ever encountered. He was not strong enough for what had come through the doors, not because he was insufficient, but because what had come through the doors had been building since the age of the world, and it was not the same kind of power at all. It was like watching a mountain try to stop the sea. The mountain was real and enormous and entirely genuine. The sea did not care. Maddox's wolf form struck the nearest of Corveth's 3 attendants and drove it back 6 feet and left a mark on the stone where the impact had transferred, and it was a statement, a clear, deliberate, everything I have statement, and it bought time. That was what it bought. Time. Shyla took the time. She went to the interior chamber where the seer and the elders and Calix were positioned, and she opened the door and she said, very quietly, to her son, "It's time." He was already dressed, already standing. He had the quality she had noticed in him for the past year, the quality of someone who has been told the general shape of a thing and has been waiting for the specific moment to arrive. He was 7 years old. She crouched down to his level, the way Maddox had always crouched to her level in the early days, choosing not to use height as a kind of superiority, and which she had incorporated into her own practice with her son. Listen to me," she said. He listened. "You are going to be afraid," she said. "That's not weakness. That's your body knowing that what you're doing matters, but you are not alone. Do you understand me? Your father is buying you time, and I am right here, and the moon has been preparing you for this since before you were born, and you are not." Her voice threatened to do something she would not permit it. She held it steady. "You are not alone." His gold and crimson eyes looked into hers. I know," he said. "She told me you'd say that." A pause. "The moon? She says you always know the right thing," he said. "She says that's why he chose you." She had 4 seconds, in the middle of everything, to feel what that did to her. Then she stood up and stepped aside and watched her 7-year-old son walk through the door toward the courtyard. The shift, when Calix stepped into the courtyard, was immediate. Not his shift, the shift in the nature of everything. The light that had been without warmth found something to organize around. The silver radiance of the champion's form, rising in the center of the white void that Corveth and his companions had brought through the doors, it was the only word. Answer. The way a lock answered a key. The way the right frequency answered a room that had been built to resonate. The enormous silver wolf stood in the courtyard, and Corveth, for the first time, stopped moving. He looked at the champion, and something crossed his not quite human face. Something that was, underneath all the centuries and all the wrongness, recognizable. It was the expression of something that has been certain of its course for a very long time, and has, in this moment, become uncertain. Maddox's wolf, bleeding from 3 places and still standing because he was constitutionally incapable of falling, while there was still something to stand between, went still. Calix's wolf turned its white eyes to its father. Something passed between them in that moment that had no language and needed none. Something that said, "I see you. I know what you did. It is enough." Then the champion turned to Corveth, and the silver light became something that was not light anymore, something that was the thing light came from, the source rather than the expression. And Corveth began to come apart. Not violently. The dissolution of something ancient, returning to what it had been before it decided to be something else, was not violent so much as it was inevitable. He came apart the way winter came apart in spring, the way a question came apart when the right answer arrived. The 3 attendants followed. The fissure in the courtyard floor sealed. The light changed back to morning. Calix shifted back in the middle of the courtyard, a small boy again. Dimik and looked down at his hands with the slightly baffled expression of someone who had just done something significantly larger than themselves and was trying to calibrate what that meant. Maddox, bleeding and upright, crossed the courtyard and went to one knee beside his son, and his son looked at him with gold and crimson eyes that were still edged with the last of the silver fire and put both small hands on his father's face. "Are you okay?" Calix asked. A pause. "No," Maddox said. I will be." "The wounds are from the attendants. They're closed-door wounds. The healer will know what to do." Maddox looked at his son for a moment. "How do you know that?" "The moon," Calix said. "She said to tell you specifically." Another pause. "Tell her," Maddox said carefully, "that I am grateful for the information." Calix nodded seriously. Then he turned. Shyla was at the courtyard door. She had been there since he walked out. She had not moved. Also, he crossed to her at the running pace of a 7-year-old who has decided the situation warrants speed, and she caught him and held him, and she shook, not with fear anymore, but with the particular full-body release of fear that has been held too long. And he held her back with arms that were, for their size, very strong. "I'm okay," he said. "I know," she said. "You're shaking." "I know." A pause. "That's because it matters," he said. It was in the tone of someone passing along information that has been confirmed as accurate. She laughed. The laugh shook out of her with the remainder of the shaking, and she held her son in the ruined courtyard while the morning light came back to normal and the stone began, slowly, to repair itself, and Maddox walked toward them with the careful gait of a man who was very injured and absolutely refusing to admit it. And the palace began to fill with the sounds of people emerging from wherever they had gone to ground. The old things had been sent back. The doors were locked again, this time from the inside, by a champion who had been born for exactly this and who had done it, and was now, apparently, hungry for breakfast. The world, which had been holding its breath, exhaled. What comes after the black cliff palace? The days following. The practical aftermath of saving the world was, it turned out, extremely administrative. This was something Shyla had not anticipated, and which she found, in the weeks that followed the courtyard battle and Corveth's dissolution and the sealing of the doors, oddly steadying. The world did not stop requiring management simply because a champion had arisen and done what champions did. The northern border packs needed assessment. The damaged perimeter needed rebuilding. The 6 guards who had been removed from the immediate situation by Corveth's attendants had injuries that required the healer's attention. The courtyard stone needed to be replaced. A formal accounting of events needed to be constructed for the other packs, framed in language that conveyed necessary information without generating mass panic. Shyla wrote the formal accounting. She had become, in 5 years, the institutional voice of the palace, not because it had been assigned to her, but because she had consistently produced the clearest prose and had the most comprehensive grasp of what needed to be communicated and what needed to be withheld. Maddox reviewed her drafts, occasionally suggested changes, and routinely marveled, she could tell from the particular quality of his silence when he read, that she existed. Calyx spent 3 days being examined by the elder healer, who declared him physically unharmed and metaphysically altered in ways that would take years to fully map. The silver light was quieter now, more internal. He seemed... The word was contentment, though she was cautious about applying it to a 7-year-old boy who had just sealed 4,000 years of imprisoned ancient power back behind its doors. He seemed as though he had completed something he had been carrying since before he was born. And the completion, while not ending anything, Ars had settled it into a shape he could live alongside. He still dreamed of the moon, but the dreams were different now. More conversational, he said, less urgent. "What do you talk about?" she asked him. "What comes next?" he said. "What comes next?" He thought about it. "She says the balance is restored, but balance needs to be maintained. She says the doors will hold as long as the champion lives. She says..." He paused. "She says I'll have help." "She's being vague about what kind." "The moon is being vague." "She says some things have to arrive on their own timeline." Shyla thought with genuine fondness that the moon sounded very much like someone she had learned to coexist with over the course of 5 years. "That sounds familiar," she said. Calyx looked at her with the expression that had first appeared on his face around age 4 and had been intensifying ever since. The expression that suggested he was aware of approximately 30% more of what was happening around him than the adults who produced it would be comfortable knowing. "I know," he said. "She said it on purpose." Maddox healed. The closed-door wounds were, as Calyx had relayed, a specific category that the elder healer knew exactly how to treat. An old knowledge, one that had not been needed in 4,000 years, but had been preserved in the palace records with the same dogged institutional comprehensiveness that had preserved everything else. He healed fast, as was his nature. By the 4th day, he was out of the healer's care. By the 7th, he was running the north perimeter in wolf form, which the healer had forbidden, and which Shyla had chosen not to spend energy trying to prevent, having learned over 5 years which constraints he would actually respect, and which he would root around regardless. He came to find her on the evening of the 7th day. She was in the library. They both spent time in the library, had from the beginning. It was, she thought, now one of the places where they were most consistently themselves, reading one of the ancient texts the seer had provided during Calyx's education, a text that addressed the post-champion period, what the world had looked like in the months and years after the last time the balance was restored. He sat across from her. She finished the paragraph she was reading. "How is it?" he asked. "The text?" "The world." She set the book down. "Steady," she said. "The healer's reports from the northern border are encouraging. The fissures are closing. The subtone is gone." "I know," he said. "That's not what I meant." A pause. "Oh," she said. He waited. He had learned to wait, not patiently exactly, because patience implied comfort with delay, and he was not fundamentally comfortable with any kind of delay. But he had learned that some things needed time to arrive, and that time was a resource he had more of than almost anyone. Oh, and he could give some of it to the arrival of things that mattered. "I am..." She stopped. "It's hard to name. I am glad. Not relieved exactly. I think relief implies that the fear was larger than the faith, and I'm not sure that's accurate. I was afraid, but I also..." Another stop. "I also knew. I don't know how to explain that to someone who didn't feel it, but I knew, from the moment he walked out that door, that it was going to be all right. Not because I could see how. Because of him. Because of who he is." Maddox looked at her for a long moment. "I felt it too," he said quietly. "Standing in the courtyard, when he shifted, I felt..." He paused in his way, the vast, careful assembly. certainty, which I had not expected. I had expected terror. And instead, I thought, she built this. What he is, the core of it. She built it in 7 years of talking to him before sleep and bringing him to the kitchens and showing him what was worth saving. I thought, if this is the outcome, then the choices that led here were correct. She looked at him across the library table and the lamp between them. We built it, she said. He considered this. Yes, he said. We did. A silence that was full rather than empty. I want to show you something, he said. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. He unfolded it and placed it on the table between them. She read it. It was a formal amendment to the palace records, a legal document. In the precise language of pack law, amending the original bond declaration that had been made 5 years ago in the snow of the upper courtyard. The amendment was one sentence. It named Calix, full name, full lineage, as heir to the Lycan throne. Not as the adopted heir of a bonded king, not with qualifications or conditions or the elaborate legal scaffolding that had been considered and discussed and ultimately set aside. Simply as heir, as son, as the next Lycan King should the day come. At the bottom, in Maddox's handwriting, not the formal scribe's hand but his own, slightly angular, the handwriting of someone who had learned to write in a different century and retained its idiosyncrasies, were the words, "This was always true. I am only making it official." She looked at the document for a long moment. Then she looked at him. Maddox. It required your signature as well, he said. As his mother and the current queen. I was told it could not be filed without both. She picked up the pen from beside the lamp. She signed it. The Stars That Stayed. The Black Cliff Palace. 1 year after the doors closed. There is a particular quality to a life that has survived its worst possibilities. It does not become easy. Nothing about the lives of Shyla and Maddox Miller, queen and king of the Black Cliff, parents of the Moon's champion, and architects of a peace that neither of them had expected to live inside, was easy. Easy was not the word. The word was textured, rich with the specific weight of things that had been chosen and survived and chosen again. The palace was different. You would have noticed it if you had known it before. Before Shyla, before Calix, before the impossible silver morning when the old things were sent back and the world reset itself to something more sustainable. The corridors were the same black stone. The fires burned in the same great hearths. The guards rotated on the same schedule they had maintained for 300 years. But the sounds had changed. There was laughter in the kitchens in the afternoon. Not just the head cook's increasingly frequent laughter, but the layered, overlapping laughter of a community that had begun, incrementally, to believe it was safe enough to be loud. There were children on the training grounds alongside the guards. Small wolf children from the palace families who had been quietly taking their cues from Calix, who played with the straightforward intensity of a boy who had sealed an ancient evil back into containment and considered this one accomplishment among many, and was now primarily interested in a project involving the garden and several species of plants that the groundskeeper had declared incompatible before being persuaded otherwise. There was music at the solstice celebration. There had not been music at the palace solstice in the elder healer's memory. Raymond of Silver Crest sent a letter in the spring. Formal, careful, occupying the uncomfortable space between apology and negotiation that was the only register available to someone trying to do something right without a vocabulary for having been so long wrong. He proposed a border compact, the first formal agreement between Silvercrest and Miller territory in 2 generations. He did not mention Calix. He did not mention Shyla. He addressed it to Maddox and signed it with his official seal. Maddox brought it to Shyla. She read it twice. "He's trying," she said. "Trying is the floor," Maddox said, "not the ceiling." "I know," Accept the compact. A pause. He does not deserve... Accept the compact, she said again. Not for him, but for the packs on both sides of the border who have been carrying the weight of whatever happened between him and me for 5 years and deserve better. He looked at her for a long moment. You are... He stopped. I know, she said. He accepted the compact. The border packs celebrated. Raymond sent a second letter that said nothing except thank you, and which she suspected had taken him considerably longer to write than its 2 words implied. She did not reply. She thought about it, for a long time, and decided that the absence of a reply was the kindest response she could offer. Not forgiveness, which was its own ongoing process and not subject to declaration, but the absence of continued engagement. The closing of a chapter that had been trying to reopen. She put his letters in the locked box and turned her attention to the life she had built. The night that would stay with her longest happened in late summer, in the garden. My calyx had expanded the East Wing garden over the past year into something that had no agricultural justification and every justification that mattered. It was not efficient. It was not organized by any logic that the groundskeeper, who had ultimately given up trying to impose one, could articulate. It was a riot of things that had been declared impossible at this altitude. Warm climate flowers alongside cold tolerance plants, herbs beside ornamental grasses, a particular rose variety that had no business surviving a mountain winter, and yet had survived 2 of them through what the groundskeeper darkly attributed to the garden's relationship with its owner. On this particular night, Shyla had come to the garden because she often came there in the evenings and found that she was not alone. Maddox was already there. He was not doing anything, just standing in the dark between 2 blooming things, which was not, for a man who had not been still since she had known him, entirely expected. She went to stand beside him. He put his arm around her. She leaned into his side. They did not speak. The garden moved around them in the summer night. The small sounds of growing things, the distant call of a nightbird, the very faint vibration in the earth that was no longer a warning but had become, since the doors closed, as a kind of signature. The world breathing, present and accounted for. I have been thinking, Maddox said after a while. She waited. I have been thinking about what I thought ruling was when I was young. He paused in his way. I thought it was the assertion of force sufficient to prevent others from asserting theirs. I thought the object was the maintenance of a hierarchy stable enough to be predictable. I thought... Another pause. I thought that was the whole of it. That was the ambition. She did not fill the silence. And now I think... He stopped again. She felt the assembly happening in him, the same careful architecture that had always preceded his most honest statements. I think that what I was doing for 300 years was surviving. Successfully, systematically, genuinely, but surviving. And what this... He moved, the arm around her tightening almost imperceptibly. What you and the boy and this garden and the music at the solstice have made of it. I think this is what I was surviving toward. And I did not know. Wait, I did not have a name for it. I could not have found it on purpose. She let that sit between them. You found me, she said. I walked into a gate and collapsed in your snow, and you took me in. The gate found you, he said. The gate and the wilderness and whatever arranging principle decided that a rejected Omega walking through a winter forest needed to arrive at my specific door. A pause. I am grateful to the arranging principle. I have not always been. There were moments in the first months where I found the arranging principle deeply inconvenient. She laughed. The sound went out into the garden. He made the sound that preceded his smiling, the slight exhale, the particular settling of his face towards something warmer than its usual architecture permitted. Tell me something, she said. He turned to look at her. If you could go back, to the night I arrived at the gate, knowing everything, what you would be choosing, what it would cost. And take and demand, would you—" "Yes," he said. The word arrived before she finished the question. She looked at him in the dark garden, this man who had been afraid of her and had let the fear teach him something, who had ruled through terror and learned the name of what he had been ruling toward, who had crouched in the snow to be level with her eyes and then spent 5 years unlearning 3 centuries of armor, one piece at a time. She took his face in her hands, the same gesture she had used with Calix on the night before the battle, the gesture that meant, "I see you, wholly, without revision." "Yes," she said. He closed his eyes. She felt the exhale of it, the release of something that had been held, probably, since the beginning. Later, they went inside. Calix was asleep, the silver of his wolf sense present but quiet, the moon tracking his rest with the attentiveness of something that has made a long investment and is watching it breathe. The palace was quiet. The boundary held. In the study off the war room, the room with 2 chairs and a reading lamp, a new set of parchment waited on the desk, filled with Shyla's handwriting. The institutional record of the year that had passed. The battle, the aftermath, the compact, the formal declaration of Calix's inheritance, the choices and their consequences, the things worth recording. She had written, on the final page, something that was not institutional. Something that was, by any measure, a departure from the formal voice of the palace records. She had written, "What I want the people who read this to know is what the records do not say, because the records, as I was told once by a very old and very good man, are written by the winners, and the winners decide what is worth recording. What is worth recording is this. A woman was rejected and walked into a wilderness and found her way to a gate. A king was alone for 300 years and opened the gate. A child was born in darkness and grew toward light and stood between the old world and the new one and chose the new one. None of this was inevitable. All of it was chosen. The moon watches, the balance holds, the garden grows. We are still here." End of Book 2. The balance is restored. The champion stands watch. But the moon has said, what was locked can be tested again. And the champion, now a boy, one day a king, has not yet learned the names of those who will stand beside him. Lycan King's Omega, Book 3, The Champion's Court, coming soon. Thank you for listening.